let's look at the social functions of theater. Oftentimes we think of the primary purposes of theater as art or entertainment, but there are a number of functions that can happen at the same time as being either art or entertainment or both. So, as you'll find in this class, art is loosey-goosey. It's overlapping, it's always changing, and so they're not hard and fast rules, but we're putting them in parameters to learn about them and to look more deeply into theater. So, one of the functions is religion. What you can see, well, when you look at these videos, is you'll see the very first form of Western theater, which is Greek theater. It was used to worship the god Dionysus, as well as other gods. This is a Kathakali, that's Sanskrit, which is a very old form of performance that is honoring the Hindu gods. And here's some Kathakali. These are the oldest forms of theater that are deeply, deeply tied to religion. There is a set place. People are telling moral stories. It's a way of worshiping. We can think of it if in a modern Christian sense. For example, when you go to a Catholic Mass, you are reenacting the Last Supper. You have lines. The priest is playing the role of Jesus. It is, in essence, a play. So, something to think about are religious rituals that you've attended. How are they theatrical? You can think of baptisms. People have specific lines that they're saying in front of a congregation. Usually the person getting baptized is wearing white, which is a symbolic type of clothing. Think of other ways that you have seen a religious ritual and what it looked like aesthetically. That is, what symbolism did you see happening? What lines are being said? What rituals were happening? And then theater and socialization. So, a Greek philosopher once said, the aim of the poet, which at that time was a playwright, they were the one and the same, is to inform and to delight. So you should be teaching people or expanding people's minds through the play that you're watching. So this video is from the KC Rep, which is the largest regional theater in this area. And it's A Christmas Carol, written by Charles Dickens. And if you're not familiar with the story, Ebenezer Scrooge is really miserly. He's very stingy. He doesn't give time off to his employees, doesn't give them enough money to survive. And then he has a change of heart after he's visited by 3 ghosts. And he becomes a warm-spirited, jolly guy. And then we have theater and politics. So theater is frequently used to reinforce the status quo. The status quo is a neutral term. It's whatever is the neutral or the way of life. It can be from the outside either really great or maybe not so great. So this example is from Hamilton, which if you have Disney Plus or a friend that does, you may have seen it. This clip is of the Schuyler sisters, and they're singing about how lucky they are to be alive right now. They are going with the status quo. Most people in the United States don't think to themselves, oh man, we really shouldn't have seceded from Britain. That was a terrible choice. It's reinforcing the idea that it was good to have a revolution. And then theater can also be subversive. So it questions the status quo. These two clips are of plays that are very famous for being subversive. This one is another Brecht play. It's called Mother Courage and Her Children. And the idea behind the play was it was written at the rise of Nazism in the 30s, I believe, in Germany by Brecht. And it was commenting on a war that happened hundreds of years prior in Germany. And it follows this woman, Mother Courage, who profiteers off of war. And ultimately, she loses everything, including her children, because of her greed. So it was a social comment on what was happening in Germany. And so the people watching the play, even though it wasn't about what was literally happening around them, they could gather what the commentary was. It was subversive. And then we have this one. This one happened in the United States. So when you watch this clip, it is actually part interview. But what I want you to focus on is getting an idea of what the play was like. This is The Crucible by Arthur Miller. Fun fact about Arthur Miller is he was married to Marilyn Monroe. He was very, very famous in that time period, and still we watch and read his plays now. So The Crucible took place, he wrote it to take place during the Salem witch trials as a commentary to McCarthyism. Now, McCarthyism, if you remember from a history class, in a nutshell, there was a Red Scare. People were very afraid that there were Russian spies everywhere, and anybody who would ever have contact with somebody who may be considered a communist or Russian was called into questioning to the HUAC committee, and it was basically a witch trial. We can see that now, especially looking back on what happened. But people, in order to stay out of trouble, would be naming others and pointing fingers and saying, so-and-so is a communist. I saw them go to a party with this person who's a communist, so obviously they are. And then they'd go to jail, and they would be censored and not be able to, make movies or write books or pretty much anything in public life. So you can take time to read more about that, but this is a subversive play because it's making commentary on what was happening during that time in the 50s mostly, and but it wasn't literally about what was happening. And then theater and coercion, recognizing its potential power, very repressive governments use the arts to win the hearts and minds of their people. So a good example is 1930s Germany, when the Nazi regime used very highly theatricalized political rallies with parades and fireworks and dances that was very pro-Nazi, and it forbade any plays that did not support the regime. So our friend Brecht, he was exiled eventually to the United States, but he was then accused of being a Nazi, or of being a communist because of his ties with Germany, and he then had to leave the United States after that. So Brecht had a rough go of it. In Soviet Russia, they only allowed strict realism in place. So that's exactly like real life, because it's easier to not have underlying messages if it's as real to everyday life as possible. Meyerhold is talked about in your book. He was known for what's called biomechanics. It's a more stylized type of performance, and he didn't stop using the stylized form of performance, and he disappeared, which is what happened in Soviet Russia if you did not follow the regime, basically, which we later found out that he died in a labor camp. Very terrible. Cultural Revolution in China also, that was later. It was different than the Cultural Revolution in the United States in the 60s. It was the exact opposite. So the government attempted to suppress all decadent or traditional art forms and theater. Luckily, after 1988, things loosened up, and a lot of things had been saved, especially physical pieces of art and paintings and sculptures were literally buried to be preserved for, almost 30 years. And then we have theater and empowerment. So theater can be used as a tool for healing, for individual growth, and for facilitating important conversations. This video is about a drama therapist. So drama therapy is a field that you can actually get your master's degree in, and you can work, oftentimes people work in prisons, or in schools, and with people with dementia and Alzheimer's. So there's a lot of different uses for theatrical techniques. And then theater as a cultural exploration. So theater mirrors the playwright, the artist, the director, and the context. A play cannot escape its context. Context includes the history of what's happening at the time it's being produced and the history of the time period in the play, the politics at the time, what was happening socially when the play was written. This is a clip of A Raisin in the Sun. It was written by Lorraine Hansberry in the 60s, and it follows an African-American family living in the south side of Chicago, and they want to make a better life for themselves, so they try to move. And I'm not going to tell you what happens in it because you're going to be reading it later this semester. And that is social functions. Let's look at social control really quick. So in some cultures and subcultures, any kind of theatrical activity has been thought of as a threat to morality. So some examples are Plato found theater disturbing because of how powerfully it affected the audiences. It's like when you go to a movie and it makes you cry, or it opens your eyes to something new and makes you want to act on your emotions. And Plato thought it was disturbing, a little bit dangerous. In early Christian church, leaders found the whole nature of performance corrupt because an actor is reciting lines that are not true to themselves, therefore they are lying. We have grown past this idea, of course. In Elizabethan England, so about 1,000 or so years later, women still could not act in England, and actors had to prove that they were under the guidance of a noble. That was because nobility was seen to be more righteous, I suppose is a good word, because they had money. We of course know that the amount of money that you have does not determine your moral qualities. So then let's look at theater regulation. It's often been regulated. All theaters were shut down when the Puritans ruled England because of the dishonest nature of actors. That was their reasoning. Theater continued on underground until King James took back the crown after the Cromwells fell. And here are some more examples. Václav Havel was a playwright. He wrote plays from prison while the Czech Republic was a part of the Soviet Union. When they finally were free of that regime, he became president of the Czech Republic for quite some time. You have Wole Soyinka. He spent 2 years in prison for plays that he wrote, as well as producing plays, and he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And then you have Augusto Boal. He was a director. He directed a play by Brecht, our friend who had to leave so many countries. And he was jailed and tortured, and he fled to Brazil, or he fled from Brazil in 1971. That's social control. So we will look at types next.